In a quiet and remote countryside where people rarely pass by, George took his loyal dog for a walk on the small path leading to the old bridge. Everything was as quiet as usual, with only the rustling of the wind through the trees and the lonely chirping of birds in the evening air. George liked the quietness of this place, which helped him temporarily escape the monotony of his daily life. But that afternoon, everything suddenly changed. The dog, which was always obedient and docile, suddenly barked loudly and was unusually tense. Before George could react, the dog jerked its leash, escaped from his hands, and rushed straight under the bridge. George panicked and chased after it, trying to keep it in sight, worried that the dog was behaving abnormally. As he approached the bridge, a strong stench immediately rose up, assaulting George's nose, causing him to wince and stop. The smell of death was too strong for George to ignore. He looked around and found a large Styrofoam box abandoned under the bridge, covered in dust and rotten leaves. Something inside him urged him to discover what was hidden inside the box. Curious but also filled with fear, George bent down and carefully opened the lid. When the lid was opened, the horrifying scene inside immediately appeared, a body chopped into many pieces, each separate piece curled up in the Styrofoam box. Horror and horror filled George. His face was pale, his hands shaking as he pulled out his phone to call the police. The peaceful and quiet afternoon of the countryside was completely shattered by a gruesome discovery. The barrel under the bridge not only contained a dismembered body, but also opened the door to a cruel secret, where the darkness of crime was about to be exposed. After receiving George's call, the quiet of the countryside was quickly shattered by the sound of police sirens. Flashing lights flashed over the old bridge where the body was found. The police cars stopped, and officers quickly sealed off the area, not allowing anyone to approach the scene. The atmosphere became more tense than ever as the forensic team approached the Styrofoam box, the center of the horrific case. George, who discovered the body, stood trembling beside it, unable to take his eyes off the horrible Styrofoam box. The police gently asked him to step back so the forensic team could work. When the lid was opened, a chaotic, horrifying scene appeared before their eyes. The body of a woman had been chopped into 17 pieces. The body parts were thrown into the box in a haphazard, disjointed manner without any order. Dried blood covered the dismembered body parts, as if the killer had done this in a frenzy, without any concern for neatness or meticulousness. Even the experienced police and forensic team had to pause for a moment before this gruesome scene. The body parts were crammed into the barrel haphazardly, as if the killer had no concern about disposing of the body, but simply wanted to get rid of them as quickly as possible. The uneven cuts, some deep, some shallow, suggested that the perpetrator may have acted in a fit of hysteria, out of control. There was no careful calculation, just a series of crazy, violent actions. The forensic team began their work, carefully collecting each body part in the chaos. They initially identified the victim as a woman in her 30s. The state of decomposition of the body suggested that the victim had probably been killed and hidden in the barrel for at least a few days before being discovered. The strong smell of death spread throughout the area, making the atmosphere more stifling and tense than ever. After collecting enough DNA samples from the body parts, the forensic team sent them to the lab for analysis. Meanwhile, police officers continued to comb the scene, hoping to find more clues that could lead to the victim's identity. All eyes were focused on the Styrofoam box, which not only contained the body of the unfortunate woman, but also the only clue to this brutal case. Finally, after many hours of tense waiting, the DNA results were in. The victim was identified as Isabel Harris, a young woman who lived in a neighborhood near the scene. She was known as a gentle wife, newly married to Jack Harris, a successful businessman. On the surface, Isabel's life seemed perfect, but the discovery of her body in this condition shattered any image of that happy life. Immediately after the victim's identity was established, the police immediately contacted Jack Harris, Isabel's husband. The unusual thing began to emerge when Jack did not report his wife missing, even though she had been gone for several days. This made the police immediately suspicious of Jack. A normal husband would immediately report or look for his wife or his wife, but she disappeared, but Jack did not make any moves. This made him the focus of suspicion. When summoned for questioning, Jack was confused and had no reasonable explanation as to why he did not report Isabel missing. His answers were disjointed, sometimes illogical, which made the police even more suspicious. Jack said he thought Isabel had just been away for a while, but when asked why he had not contacted her, he could not give a convincing answer. Jack's erratic behavior, coupled with his lack of action when his wife disappeared, raised further suspicions among the police. What they discovered after their initial interrogation were a series of holes and inconsistencies in Jack's story. It seemed that Jack was trying to hide something, and the police understood that this could be the clue to the truth behind Isabel's death. The investigation began to focus on Jack and Isabel's married life. The contradictions in Jack's testimony forced the police to unearth all the details of their relationship. Was the happy exterior just a cover for hidden cracks in their marriage? What secrets were hidden behind closed doors in the Harris family? And was Jack involved in Isabel's horrific death? The investigation has come a long way, and all eyes are now on Jack Harris, the once miserable husband who has emerged as the prime suspect. The truth of the case remains shrouded in mystery, but police know they are getting closer to uncovering the horrors that lurk behind the curtain of the Harris family's seemingly perfect marriage. The investigation continued with suspicions increasingly focused on Jack Harris. After discovering discrepancies in his story, the police decided to take a closer look at every detail, including checking the security camera system around Jack's house. Officers knew that camera footage often did not lie, and that it could help unravel the mystery of what really happened the night Isabel went missing. When the investigation team began analyzing the security camera footage around Jack's house, they quickly discovered something unusual. At around 2 a.m., the security camera in front of the house recorded Jack leaving the house with 2 large styrofoam boxes. The footage showed him carrying them out of the house, holding each box tightly in one hand, his face unclear because of the dim streetlights. The police immediately realized that these boxes could be the key to solving Isabel's death. The timing of Jack's removal of the boxes coincided with the night Isabel went missing, and the size of the boxes was similar to the styrofoam box found under the bridge, where Isabel's body was found. This discovery completely changed the direction of the investigation. The styrofoam box that the police found under the bridge was clear physical evidence, and now with the security camera footage, things began to become clearer. The officers were able to link the box Jack removed from the house on the night Isabel went missing to the box that contained the body that was found later. There was no doubt that Jack was directly involved in disposing of his wife's body, but the bigger question remained, why did he do it? And what really happened that night? With clearer evidence, the police decided to call Jack Harris in for a statement. When he was brought into the interrogation room, Jack sat before the investigators with a cold and calm demeanor, trying not to show any emotion. Initially, he denied any involvement in Isabel's death, claiming that he knew nothing about his wife's disappearance, and that Isabel's disappearance was a complete surprise to him. Jack even expressed that he felt insulted when the police considered him a suspect in his wife's death. However, Jack's confidence gradually wavered when the investigators presented clear evidence in front of him. Security camera footage recorded Jack carrying 2 styrofoam boxes out of the house on the night Isabel went missing was shown before his eyes. The investigators didn't need to say much. The image said it all. Jack suddenly became tense. His face began to show confusion. He tried to explain that the boxes were just trash, and he took them out in the middle of the night because he didn't want to leave them in the house for too long. But the investigators didn't easily believe that explanation. The constant questioning from the police began to make Jack lose his composure. He tried to keep a calm appearance, but couldn't hide the awkward moments when answering. The police asked him in detail about why he had not reported Isabel missing, as well as why he had thrown out the trash in the middle of the night when it made no sense. The more Jack tried to come up with a defense, the more holes in his story became apparent. There was no way he could reasonably explain the coincidence between the time he took the styrofoam box out of the house and the time Isabel's body was found in a similar box under the bridge. The atmosphere in the interrogation room became tense. Jack's initial confidence was clearly no longer there. As the police continued to question him about his involvement in Isabel's death, he began to lose patience, his speech becoming jumbled and incoherent. His tension rose as the evidence before him became more compelling, but Jack still refused to confess. Despite his obvious confusion, he continued to deny any involvement in his wife's death, clinging to weak excuses. The investigators, who had experience with many suspects before, noticed that Jack was in a state of anxiety. They knew that even though he hadn't confessed, his confusion and fumbling were signs that the truth was not far off. They decided to push the investigation further, focusing on examining other details of Jack and Isabel's lives in order to uncover the full truth behind the case. The investigation was still ongoing, but with the evidence now available, the police knew they had the important pieces to put the whole story together. Jack Harris, the husband who had been considered the main witness in Isabel's disappearance, was now the prime suspect. Can he keep his secret forever, or will the truth finally force him to bow his head and confess? After hours of interrogation, Jack Harris was finally cornered. The undeniable evidence had destroyed all his lies. Under pressure from the police, Jack bowed his head and confessed his crime, his voice trembling as he recounted what had happened. The relationship between Jack and Isabel, according to Jack, had been very happy. But after getting married, his work became increasingly busy, leading to him being away from home often, leaving Isabel alone in loneliness. Jack admitted that he no longer had time for his wife, and this had caused a big gap in their marriage. In recent months, Jack began to notice unusual changes in Isabel. She often texted and smiled while looking at her phone, which made Jack suspicious and jealous. This suspicion grew, haunting Jack every day. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, Jack decided to pretend to go on a business trip, but in fact, he was following his wife. During one of his follow-ups, he discovered Isabel meeting James, his best friend. When he saw Isabel enter James's house, Jack felt like his whole world collapsed before his eyes. Feelings of betrayal, pain, and anger arose. He could not keep calm. Jack stormed into James's house in a rage. Before his eyes was the image of Isabel and James together. Unable to bear the rage, Jack pulled out a gun and shot both of them dead on the spot. But the anger did not stop there. After realizing that he had killed someone, Jack fell into a state of panic. He did not know what to do other than decide to dispose of the bodies to hide the crime. In the chaos, Jack dismembered Isabel and James, each body cut into approximately 17 pieces. He carefully stuffed each piece into 2 large styrofoam boxes. Jack admitted that it was panic that drove him to do this, but the brutal act was also a calculated and desperate attempt to conceal the crime. After dismembering the bodies, Jack took the 2 styrofoam boxes out of the house, dumping Isabel's body under the bridge, where he thought no one would find it. Jack hid James' body nearby, in a secluded forest. But Jack's plan could not hide the truth forever. When all the evidence was presented by the police, he had no choice but to admit to the entire crime. What started as a suspicion turned into a painful and gruesome tragedy, ending with a dark truth that Jack tried desperately to hide. After his rampage claimed the lives of Isabel and James, Jack Harris began to face the brutal reality of what he had done. The room where the crime had taken place fell eerily silent, leaving only the image of the 2 bodies lying motionless amid the bloodstains on the floor. Jack's heart pounded. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He knew he had gone too far, and there was no turning back. The horror of his actions was quickly replaced by an overwhelming fear. How could he cover up this crime? Jack's thoughts were in turmoil. He knew that if the police discovered the bodies of Isabel and James, he would not only lose everything, but also face life in prison, or worse. Fear had turned Jack from a cheating husband into a desperate man, and in a panic, he decided that the only way to cover up his crime was to dispose of the bodies. Hiding the bodies was no easy task, and Jack knew he couldn't leave any traces that would lead the police back to him. He remembered the 2 large styrofoam boxes in the shed boxes he'd used to transport his belongings during previous moves. The idea slowly formed in Jack's mind. He would cut Isabel and James' bodies into small pieces, put them in the boxes, and then dispose of them where no one would find them. In a panic, Jack searched for a large knife in the kitchen. He trembled as he held it, but the fear of being forced into this brutal act forced him to carry out the act. He began to dismember Isabel first. Each cut was filled with desperation, both savage and painful. He cut Isabel into 17 pieces, each small enough to fit into the large styrofoam box. Blood stained the floor, stained Jack's hands and clothes, but he no longer thought about it. Once he had dismembered Isabel, he moved on to James, doing the same to his once close friend. Once he had dismembered Isabel, he moved on to James, doing the same to his once close friend. In that brutal moment, Jack was no longer human. The complex emotions of regret and fear seemed to have been suppressed, replaced by apathy and hysteria. When the brutal job was finished, both bodies were now just dismembered pieces, neatly stuffed into 2 large styrofoam boxes. Now, Jack faced his next task, disposing of the boxes. He decided that the best place to dispose of them was a remote rural area near an old bridge, a place no one frequented. In the middle of the night, Jack drove there, carrying the 2 styrofoam boxes in the trunk. His heart pounded in his chest every time he saw the headlights of oncoming cars, fearing that someone might see him. But luckily, the deserted road allowed him to complete the trip without being detected. When they got close to the bridge, Jack carried the box containing Isabel's body down first. He walked under the bridge, found a hidden corner, and threw the box in there. The stench began to rise, but Jack did not dare to look back. He quickly returned to the car and continued his journey to the nearby forest, where he planned to hide James's body. In the dark forest, Jack found a spot near a less-traveled trail. He threw the styrofoam box containing James's body in there, then quickly left the scene. During the entire process of disposing of the body, Jack always felt scared. He was constantly worried that someone would happen to pass by, see him, or hear strange noises from him. The anxiety increased his heart rate every second, but in the end, Jack finished disposing of the body. Despite his success in disposing of the body, Jack could not escape the haunting thoughts that weighed heavily on his mind. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the images of the two people he had murdered, Isabel with empty eyes and James with a distorted face. Nightmares continued to haunt him every night, making it impossible for Jack to sleep. He feared that one day the truth would be revealed, and the police would find out what he had tried to hide. In the following days, Jack tried to live as normal as possible, but he was constantly afraid. Every time he saw the police patrolling, he felt like they were about to come and arrest him. Every phone call, every doorbell rang, making Jack jump. He lived in fear, worrying about when his crime would be discovered. Although Jack tried to remain calm when the police called him in for questioning, he could not hide the confusion in his mind. As more evidence was found, he knew that the day of his arrest was not far away. The obsession with his crime grew, enveloping Jack's entire life, turning each passing day into a nightmare with no way out. Jack's plan to dispose of the body seemed complete, but he knew that his sins could never be hidden forever. Although the bodies of Isabel and James were buried in the darkness of the deep forest and under the remote bridge, the ghost of the truth still lingered around Jack's life, waiting for the day his crimes would be exposed to the light. After receiving Jack's shocking confession, the police continued to intensify their investigation. They began to dig into every detail Jack had provided, re-examining the entire crime scene, statements, and every possible clue. Even though Jack had confessed to the crime, the police still needed to verify every word and find the body of James, the second victim that Jack had disposed of after dismembering him. The forest where Jack said he had hidden James' body became one of the key points in the search. The search did not last long. Thanks to Jack's description and the patience of the investigation team, they discovered a styrofoam box hidden near a forest trail. James' body, dismembered into many pieces, was neatly placed in the box, just as Jack had confessed. The police carefully collected evidence, including fingerprints, DNA samples, and other items related to the case. All the evidence matched Jack's testimony, leaving no room for him to deny his guilt. After recovering James' body and comparing it with the evidence at the scene where Isabel's body was found, the police quickly concluded that Jack Harris was the sole perpetrator. All the evidence from the security camera footage, the styrofoam box containing the body, to Jack's confession linked together, leaving no room for doubt as to what Jack had done. Jack's initial justifications of suspicion and anger only served to further clarify his motives, turning the murder from a fit of rage into a brutal, meticulously planned crime of dismemberment and disposal. The Jack Harris case quickly became the focus of the media. News channels simultaneously reported on the brutality of the murder, the gruesome dismemberment and disposal of the body that Jack had committed. The community was shocked by the story of a seemingly normal husband who had become a cold-blooded killer. Information about the marital status of Jack and Isabel and the illicit relationship between Isabel and James further shocked public opinion. This story spread widely, not only affecting the families of the two victims, but also leaving a deep, haunting impression on the community. The whole city was immersed in fear and horror at this barbaric crime. Jack, a man once considered the epitome of success, was now labeled a brutal murderer. Every detail of the case, from the motive to the process of the crime, became a topic of discussion everywhere. Newspapers kept up with developments in the case, and the trial of Jack Harris became one of the most closely watched legal events. With clear and undeniable evidence, Jack Harris was arrested and brought to trial. The trial attracted a lot of public attention as everyone waited for the outcome of the crime. In court, Jack still tried to stay calm, but the evidence before his eyes was too obvious, leaving no way out for him. The brutality of the crimes that Jack had committed, from killing his wife and best friend to dismembering and disposing of the body, made the jury have no mercy. Jack Harris was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. This sentence was not only a suitable punishment for the barbaric crimes he had committed, but also a warning to all those who thought they could hide their crimes in the most brutal way. Jack now had to live in the solitude of prison, facing his own sins, unable to escape or hide any longer. The Jack Harris case ended with severe punishment for the perpetrator, but the consequences it left for the victims' families and the community will not easily fade. The truth has been revealed, but the pain and trauma of those involved will never be forgotten.